Hopefully you can see some of the guys just there on the screen. Say hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey.
And I'm going to knock everyone out, not literally, thankfully. I'm going to say goodbye to all of you apart from Max for now. Okay. And there we go. Max, how are you doing, man?
Hi, Eddie. Yeah, I'm doing well, thank you. Doing well.
Well, it's good to see you. I think the last time I saw you in person was last November in Nottingham.
Yeah, that's right. It was face to face, and a great show. And we were, I guess, primed for doing the same again this year. But I guess we know how events have turned out.
Well, exactly. I mean, I think that was our second last show, because I think the only show we've done in between that was Newcastle at the end of February this year, which I think, along with the Old and Rare show, was the two of the last whiskey festivals since this whole thing started.
Yeah, I think we squeezed one in maybe very early March or February in Birmingham that did go ahead. Okay. But yeah, it all came to a crashing end after that, sadly.
Yeah. Well, listen, regardless, it's great to see you and great to have you on. Thanks for taking part, because, well, obviously, being an Englishman myself, I'm very proud of that fact. You know, it's great to see the English whiskey industry booming, and we're you know, I don't think we could have done this necessarily 2 years ago. You know, I don't think there was the capacity to do it, whereas now there seems to be a real momentum, and you're very much part of that, no doubt. So I'm sure the viewers will be fascinated to hear the story of White Peak and of how you do things. So what I'm going to do, Max, is I'm going to dip out so that you can do the talking for the first 10 minutes or so, and then I'll come back and see you when it looks like you're ready to chat.
Okay, sounds great, Eddie.
Okay, I shall see you soon. There you go.
Okay, well, thanks, Eddie. Thanks for the intro, and also thanks for inviting us to take part today. Yeah, we're delighted to be here. We're, I guess, we're in good company, and you know, I would say up front that I think we're the only distillery here representing the English category today that actually doesn't yet have any whiskey out. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. So. Yeah, in terms of history, in terms of you know, how we got going, for those that aren't familiar, White Peak Distillery is based up in Derbyshire, in outside a town called Ambergate. So we're right on the River Derwent, and we back into an ancient woodland called Shining Cliff Woods. And Derbyshire is where I grew up, and certainly in terms of what was a dream for me, really, of setting up a whiskey distillery, it was always planned to be in Derbyshire or the Peak District. You know, pretty much an area that I've loved for decades. And we found our home in what used to be a former wire works, started in 1876 and ran for about 120 years. So they used to make large cables. Some of them were used on the Humber Suspension Bridge, similar bridge in Niagara, similar one in Manhattan in New York. And this area of Derbyshire is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Mainly has that designation because of the cotton mill founders. So these were the fathers of the Industrial Revolution. So anyway, we're in this area of Derbyshire where I guess, you know, the kind of beautiful countryside meets this industrial heritage, and certainly the wire works is a big part of our DNA, and certainly sort of influences our approach to the business. We've got this sort of legacy that dates back 300 or 400 years of entrepreneurs that were doing great things, and I guess leaving their mark on the world. And you know, we'd like to think we'll be carrying that forward. So we started the company in 2016. Took us about 18 months to basically establish the distillery. So the building we're in, there were no roofs, no power supply, no water supply, no drainage. So it took a few months to get it back to a blank canvas. and then about 8 months to install the distillery. We worked with a local engineering firm called Musk Engineering, who did the mash house actually at the Lakes Distillery, and we were really fortunate because they're based in Derbyshire, and actually all of our washbacks, our hot liquor tanks, our mash tun was all fabricated in their stainless steel workshop in Derbyshire. So a lot of our kit's been made locally, which for me was a wonderful thing to find. We pretty much designed the distillery ourselves. We were very much on a tight budget, and I just spent a lot of time along with our head distiller and the engineers looking at sort of every step of the process and really sort of thinking about the style of spirit we wanted to make. And that influenced obviously the design of the distillery. And we turned on our stills in April 2018. So we've been going now for around about 30 months. We did our first mash on the 12th of April. And we filled of the order of 800 casks now. Just in terms of sort of operating volumes, we are around about 90,000 litres of spirit, so 60,000 LPA. And as I said at the beginning, we're yet to have any whiskey out. Our first release is planned for about 12 months hence, so October 2021, providing we're happy, and we are confident based on the sampling and the sort of what we've been tasting so far. And indeed, you've got some of that today to try. So in terms of I guess our approach to whiskey making and also our core spirit, we're making a lightly peated single malt. So we use essentially two different types of barley. We use heavily peated and we use unpeated, and we blend the two together to achieve the lightly peated single malt spirit. And we're around or about 6 to 8 parts per million. So, very much only just on the scale in terms of level of peat. And for us, it wasn't necessarily that we wanted to be identified as producing peated whiskey. We just, when we were doing our research into what was going to be our style, we just really liked this light level of peat and the background complexity that it adds. So lightly peated is our core house style. And in terms of our approach to whiskey making, I suppose probably like a number of the distilleries here today, there are things such as our stills that we designed ourselves, again with a view on the style of spirit we wanted to make. But we've really placed a lot of emphasis around fermentation in particular. Part of that is because of the drinks influence in this area of the country. So in Derbyshire, there's a really huge brewing scene and a lot of brewing heritage. And if you look at craft beer, and certainly it was something that I was doing 6 to 10 years ago, I just seeing some really interesting flavors coming out, and talking to the breweries. A lot of that is put down to the yeast that they're using, or the yeast strains that they're using. And I just thought that was a really interesting conversation, and not one that I'd heard spoken of a lot in whiskey circles, which kind of struck me as being slightly odd, because effectively at the front end of the process we're making beer. So anyway, for about a year, we spent a lot of time going to local breweries, cropping some of their live brewers yeast and bringing that back to our small kind of research area, and using that live yeast for doing small scale fermentations and distillations. Anyway, kind of wind forward the clock 2.5 years, and every week we now go to a brewery 50 miles north of us in the Peak District, and we collect 75 to 90 litres of live brewer's yeast. And we pitch 5 litres of that in every single mash we do. We are using some dry distillers yeast as well, so it's our own blend. But we're absolutely convinced that we're creating some flavour because of this yeast blend that we're using, and really the live yeast is a big part of that. We're creating some flavour during that fermentation, which carries across through distillation into our new make spirit. And I suppose the other aspect of fermentation is the length of fermentation. And we're not unique in terms of looking at that length of fermentation. I think for craft distilleries, again, there's some really interesting flavors to be had at that longer fermentation time. So we run 96 hours or 4 days. We tried 3 days, we tried 4, we tried 5, and then we stepped back to 4. It felt like the sweet spot for us for flavor, allied with our style of spirit, and also the flavors we were getting from the yeast strain that we use. So very much for us, I guess our focus in the whiskey making, i.e. for me, it's the kind of part of the process before the spirit gets into the cask, is very much on that mashing and fermentation piece. And then, as I also mentioned, the stills were handmade to our design by Macmillan Coppersmiths, so just outside Edinburgh. We've got a 3,000 litre wash still and a 2,100 litre spirit still. And the spirit still is designed to essentially encourage a lot of copper contact, reflux. It's got a relatively tall, thin neck. It's got an upward sloping lie pipe. And so we're trying to an extent to clean up some of the spirit to end up with a relatively smooth and fruit forward new make, really trying to capture some of those fruity notes and fruity esters that we get during fermentation. So for us, that's a big part of our sort of focus on flavor. And then I guess in terms of today, what we're presenting is a sample that's been aged for 24 months. So as I mentioned, not yet whiskey, and it's from one of our STR casks, which for those that aren't familiar is essentially a refurbished red wine cask. STR stands for shaved, toasted and recharred. And what's really interesting about that STR cask, it's been developed to really help the spirit, I guess, come to fruition. Relatively young, it's quite an active cask style, and we're not the only distillery using the STRs. Dan's on here today from the Cotswolds, and certainly it's a big part of their inventory. But it's a wonderful cask style. What's interesting is when we're working with the cooperage that we use in Portugal, because the cask is being refurbished and they essentially take the ends off the casks to do that, you can specify a number of things that you'd like. So you can specify char levels, and then you can also specify potentially using a combination of different oaks. And certainly the sample we've got here for you today is from a cask where we had the original American oak ends or heads replaced in French oak. So if you think about the cask, broadly speaking, probably 10 to 15% of the surface area is the ends. And then in the case of this particular sample you've got before you, we've got some French oak influence here, which does add some spicy notes that we don't see as much of from the American oak. And again, in terms of this sample, we've presented it, we've kind of lifted our skirts a bit here. We've presented it at 62.6%. So it's straight out the cask. We did filter it, but we cast at 63.5. It's kind of interesting to me, actually, that after 2 years in cask, we've only lost about 0.7% per annum of the ABV, but it is very much at cask strength. So when you're sampling it, obviously I would encourage you to try it neat, but it will certainly take some water. And one of the reasons we thought we'd give everyone online today the sample at that strength was, I suppose, really so you can understand a little bit more about the journey that you might get from sampling it by adding different amounts of water. So in terms, I'm just going to pour myself the rest of my little dram, but in terms of nose, we get quite a lot of toffee coming through, some clove and some spiciness from the French oak. But we're really excited just how sort of full-bodied the spirit is after 24 months. And then for me, at least, I get the light peat kind of more on the finish, and that sort of just goes back to that sort of very low level of peatiness in that sort of 6 to 8 ppm that I spoke about. And for me, as I say, it kind of extends into the finish. So this is a cask style that we're really excited about. We do expect it to probably form a fairly significant part of some of our earlier releases. I hope you all enjoy what you taste. And Eddie, I can see you back, so yeah, happy to dive into any Q&A.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I must admit, I didn't realise myself that it was at full cask. It's very potent, isn't it? But as you say, adding increasing amounts of water just helps bring out some of the lighter notes. But it's very, very chewy, very, very spicy and delicious.
Yeah, and I think we, I guess with your audience, Eddie, we often find very kind of well experienced and educated whiskey drinkers. So we thought, well, look, let's give everyone the chance to decide on their own dilution point.
Yeah, well, that's very generous of you. Thanks. A couple of questions have come in. Alex Task is asking, are you able to mention the brewery that you're using?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's not a state secret. I'll give a little bit of background. When we started up, we were a new business. This brewery's been established for almost 20 years. And I think, there was a sense in which, they built up a really great reputation. I mean, we've got a few collaborations going on with them, but we are a bit of an unknown quantity for them. So they didn't necessarily want us, shouting from the hilltops who we were working with. And then also for me, it isn't as much. The kind of the brand of the brewery that we're working with. It's this whole concept around live yeast. So, we didn't want people to sort of latch on to the brewery as if, that of itself then became something that was, totally significant in terms of what we were doing. So anyway, with that background, the brewery is Thornbridge. So yeah, they're 15 miles up the road from us. And we've just actually finished, week 10 days worth of really interesting collaboration with the guys from Thornbridge. So we hooked up with their brewers and came up with a totally different grist bill to what we are running generally. So we basically cleaned everything down, and we've spent the last 6 mashes we've done is with this new grist bill. It won't be single malt. There's all kinds of stuff in there. But we're quite excited about that for the future.
Oh, nice. That sounds fascinating. I was just going to ask, actually, on the back of that, have you any ambitions to do the fermentation yourself?
Yeah, I mean, Eddie, that's something that we'd like to bring in house. So it's really just a function of having the right investment and the space to do it, because it needs to be an area that is properly managed and looked after. So yes, we will be bringing our own yeast propagation in house, and hopefully that will give us more kind of wherewithal to do some more experimentation around what we've been doing for the last 2.5 years.
Yeah, that sounds fascinating. I can't wait to actually be able to come and see you at some point. But you're not a million miles away, so hopefully when conditions allow, we'll definitely do that.
Yeah, no, I mean, the world's become a little bit of a bigger place in COVID, but yeah, we're generally speaking, not that far away in the Midlands.
Exactly. There are a few other questions, but I'm just conscious of time, so I'm going to get the next presenter in for now, and then perhaps put them to you a little bit later, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Well, actually, one question. Can you just reiterate the ABV, because I think I put the wrong one in the pack. I think I put the 50.1, whereas is it 62.7? You said.
Okay, Eddie. Good. Let me just double check. We've obviously done. We were on another festival yesterday, as you're aware. So I'm just going to absolutely double check what we sent.
Thanks.
In fact, rather than hold people up, I'll clarify that.
Okay.
Thanks.
No problem. Well, thanks very much for that, Max. Really fascinating, and we'll get you back on in a little while. Okay.
Yeah. Great.
Okay, so I'm gonna bring Joe in now from this very distillery. Joe, where are you?
Here I am.
Well, look at that.
Look at that, as if by magic.
As if by magic, we've got a whiskey maker.
There we go.
How are you doing?
Yeah, good. Yeah. Yes, thanks once again for bringing your festival in a box to Spirit of Yorkshire Distillery.
Pleasure. Thanks for having us. But let's not dwell on that. Obviously, we're here to talk about your Filey Bay and this particular bottling. So
Sure.
I'm going to sit here and be as quiet as possible whilst you talk to the camera and tell people about where we are and what you're doing.
Yeah, great stuff. I'm going to take a kind of viewpoint that there's some people watching this that may have never come across us before. Obviously, if that is the case, we are the first single malt whiskey from Yorkshire. We are up on the East Coast. We're near, very, very near to a coastal town called Filey. In fact, just actually from the back of the distillery there, we can see the beach, Filey Bay, which, on a clear day can look pretty stunning just from the back of the distillery. Hence why we have Filey Bay on the name of our whiskey. So we're about an hour from York, I suppose, is one way of looking at it, about an hour and 45 from Leeds. If you can make it up for a visit, as and when that might be, I'd urge you to do it so you can kind of get under the skin of what we're doing. There's only really so much we can summarize in kind of 15 minutes or so. But I'll do it my best, give it my best shot, I suppose. We started in 2016. The stills behind me were fired in May 16. First cask went down in June 2016. In the 3-year period ahead of having whiskey, we obviously opened to the public, ran tours, tastings, did a series of kind of young pre-whiskey bottlings leading up to our whiskey launch, which we did last year. So we have now kind of been out with whiskey for just over a year, which is amazing. That first release was an absolute cracker. It was a 6,000 bottle release, and it flew very quickly, as you might expect. Since then, we've done a series of bottlings. Back in March, we did a Moscatel finish, followed by an STR wine cask finish. Obviously, Max was talking a bit about those previously. We followed that with the bottling that we're tasting today, which is our Yorkshire Day 2020 bottling. Obviously, you all know and love Yorkshire Day. You all know exactly when it is. When is that? We did this bottling really for our open day, which we kind of put in early in August. In the last couple of years, has fallen on the weekend close to Yorkshire Day, which is the 1st of August. So this would have been our open day bottling. It's one of 1,500. It's bottled at 55%, and it's quite punchy, but it's also very soft, very sweet, very full. Well, I'll talk a bit more specifically on that whiskey in a moment. Since we fired the stills, we've been working through 4 tons of malt a week. We're a little bit unusual. I suppose actually what the really interesting thing with a tasting like this, when you've got someone like Max and White Peaks side to side with us, he's talking about the work that they do with a local brewery. About 2.5 miles that way is our family farm where we grow all the barley in production. It's also the home of Wold Top Brewery, which is our sister company, and so we basically share a mash tun with Wold Top. It's a 1 ton mash. We've got 2 fermenters up there, 2 to 10,000 litre fermenters. And so, yeah, we're running 4 tons of malt through that a week, which is giving us 20,000 litres of wash. Every ton of malt is a day's distillation here. So the kit behind it, you can see that's our spirit still, 3,500 litre spirit still. Just beyond that, you can see it just in the background, you can kind of make out the window on the neck of the still. That's our wash still. It's a 5,000 litre wash still. So yeah, every time we fire these stills, it's like a ton of malt going through our process. And, you know, that gives us enough juice every week, enough new make spirit to fill 14 and a half, 15 casks, just like this one here, which is first fill bourbon, and indeed the one that's next to Eddie and the one to my side here. So, you know, it's fair to say we're not micro. You know, we're making, you know, a lot of booze. To date, you know, we filled you know, around 2,500 casks we've got laid down now. Bulk of that is first fill bourbon, but we have filled some sherry as well. So, yeah, any questions at this stage? Anybody jumping in?
Just nice comments.
Just nice comments. Oh, that's good. That's lovely to hear. Thanks very much. So yeah, I guess yeah, like I say, it's quite hard to kind of cram everything into this, but what's really important to us is the field to bottle production principle. You know, we're in a very privileged position where we can do that. We can grow typically 600 tons of malt a year up on the farm. We're using 200 tons of that for the production of whiskey. The rest we're using for beer. And that does mean, you know, it's, like I say, a privileged position. If you wanted to, I could wind the whiskey back that's in your glass now. I could run it back through our warehousing record, through our distillation record, through the brewery record, and take you, stand you in the field around Tom's farm where the stuff was grown. Which, you know, obviously in whiskey is a real rarity. Yeah, it means we, you know, there's other parts, there's other advantages basically to having a farm at the back of your distillery. You know, clever ways of using that land and how we're trialing the way we're growing the barley each year. For example, we've used a process called direct drilling, which means you don't kind of turn over the fields as you might expect in a traditional kind of farming way. And by doing that, you're locking more carbon into the soil. You're leaving the root structures in there from the previous things that you planted. And ultimately, long story short on this is that, you know, we could be, if all the science adds up, you know, in a position where we're making carbon neutral whiskey, which is amazing. So, you know, it's not just the fact, oh, we've got, you know, our own barley. You know, it's kind of more than that. So I suppose that's a quick summary. Onto the whiskey. As I say, we launched this for what would have been our open day. I suspect had that actually gone ahead as planned, kind of open day on a Saturday, cask on a day for us on a Sunday, and I doubt we'd have any of this left. But, you know, there is still a few bottles of this available from us if you are interested in picking one up. Get that in there, obviously.
The opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. Got a link you can pop on there. That'd be great. But yeah, there's still some of this available. And yeah, the first thing we bottled at a higher strength than 46. Went for the strength at 55. Did a lot of work on this bottling over lockdown. It was quite a nice time working just solo in the warehouse, just up there with all the casks, just kind of popping bungs, drilling casks, pulling samples, and just kind of working on this combination. 3 bourbon casks, 1 PX sherry butt. We do have 2 distillate styles as well. I won't go into that right now, but if the distillate styles here, the PX butt was the lighter of our 2 styles. And yeah, you know, it's a kind of nice way to layer the flavors in. The casks just worked really well together. After all the work putting that batch together, then tried it at lots of different strengths, and which I do with most of, if not all, the bottlings we're doing. But 55, it just really works.
Yeah. Now it's clear from talking to you. Obviously, I know you, and but also to Max and the other guys that, you know, you're almost unanimously whiskey geeks, aren't you? And I'm just wondering, because it must be quite challenging sometimes to actually rein that in, because I'm sure you want to try all kinds of wacky things and you know, really get
yeah, no, you can get totally carried away.
So how do you temper that?
Well, you temper that.
What does David do?
Yeah, you temper that with balance, isn't it? there's a reason why I'm not in accounts. And I can remember walking through the door here back in 2016. It was November 16. It's like 4 years that I've been here with Tom and David, who are the founders. If you're wondering the names that we keep dropping in here, so Tom and David set this up. And they, all credit to them, because they've managed to, in production sense, kind of rein in, I suppose, the side of getting overexcited and filling, hundreds of different cask types, loads of different sizes of casks. And what this means is that we've got a really solid foundation of stock, which does help you underpin a house style. So, going forward into the year. So, for me, how to rein in my geekiness is that, it's Tom and David.
Yeah. So if they weren't here, this place would be a shambles.
Probably, yeah. I'll totally admit that. Yeah.
I think that's very honest of you.
They've been around a few years, and they've built successful businesses, and they know what they're doing.
Good. Well, thanks for that. And
you're welcome.
I have to say, I had to add a ton of water into that to just calm it down.
Okay.
It's very big, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it's a punchy dram. There's no doubt.
Not that I mind doing that,
Yeah. No, again, it's young whiskey, and it's bottled at a very high ABV. Get a few drops of water in it, it will definitely stand up to that. And indeed, you might prefer it.
Indeed. Well, thanks very much, Joe. We're going to.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
I'm going to bring in Matt. How are you doing?
Hey, Eddie. I'm good. How are you?
I'm very well, and I'm aware that you've been doing this all weekend, so I'll try not to keep it.
No, it's my pleasure.
But you've got a lot of fans. Obviously, Bimber in the very short time that you guys, as well as the other guys have been around, you seem to have gathered so much support and a massive fan base in the whiskey geekosphere, as it were, as well as locally. But obviously there may be some among the viewers that haven't tried Bimber before and would like to obviously hear how it all came to be and then what they're going to be drinking.
For sure, yeah. So hi, I'm Matt Mackay. I work for Bimber Distillery. We're based down in North Acton in the west of London. We were founded in 2015. Our heritage comes from Poland, from sort of the communist era of Polish history, where our master distiller and founder's grandfather was effectively a moonshiner. He was making spirit hidden in basements, hidden away in woods from the authorities to avoid the taxman. And he passed down the techniques that he learned then to his father and then on to Darius, our founder and master distiller. And those techniques are kind of fundamental to what we're doing in Bimber. They're about being very hands-on with the spirit, no automation, no computerization, and using your sense of smell, touch, and taste throughout the whiskey making process. So you'll see that reflected in our name, Bimber, which literally translates from Polish as moonshine. You'll also see those roots in our logo, amazingly recreated behind me by my friend in Lego. The eagle's head comes from atop of the Polish coat of arms. There it is faced to the left, to the past. We've modernized that eagle and we've faced it to the right, the future. Similar to the other distilleries you've heard from, we are a field to glass distillery. Other than growing the barley, we do everything under one roof. Our barley comes from Fordham and Allen, which is a single farm based in Basingstoke. There we have concerto and laureate strains of barley, so a combination of the two different styles of two-row barley grown for us. It's then moved a little further west to Warminster Maltings, which is England's oldest maltster, where Bimber has its own dedicated malting floor. So they're producing between Warminster and Fordham Allen all of the barley needs for our distillery. Once it's been over to Warminster and it's been malted, it's back to London, to what is perhaps an unexpected location for a distillery. We're based in an industrial estate, and certainly you wouldn't expect, if you did happen to walk past us, there's this little craft distillery tucked away there. But once you get inside the venue, for anyone who's been, and we won't run tours still at the moment, so fingers crossed, you're more than welcome to come and see us. But then it really is a sort of a little gem of whiskey geekery, which seems to be a common thread coming from all of my English colleagues. We are all whiskey geeks naturally. Our process is somewhat different from other distilleries. We do not mill the barley. We simply crack it. We want to preserve all the husks because we want to promote a particularly clear wort for our style of whiskey, which I'll come on to talk about in a minute. Perhaps the two things that we're most well known for, one is our in whiskey standards, long fermentation of 168 hours, so 7 days. And that fermentation is conducted in washbacks fermenters that we built ourselves. We are very fortunate that our master distiller owns a carpentry business, so we have access to experienced carpenters and woodworkers. So we built 7 3,000-litre American oak, not pine, American oak washbacks that we lightly toasted inside and that we keep open topped throughout the fermentation. So that does two things. One, with that length of fermentation, you're building up, as Max mentioned in the first talk, you're building up a lot of esterification and congeners. But two, by leaving these washbacks open topped, we're very open, and indeed we encourage the formation of wild yeast. So it's fundamentally our belief that fermentation forms a set of those sort of fruity DNA flavors that you're going to get in a Bimber whiskey. And what we're then doing in distillation is we're simply reinforcing those. We're taking the flavor and the volume and the feel that we've created in that wash, and then we're amplifying it into spirit. Distillation takes place in 2 Portuguese alembics. If you look us up online, you'll see that alembic design. It almost looks like a sort of a one bubble and then a little bubble on top. They're fully copper pots that we have customized ourselves further to increase the volume of copper, both in the pot through hammering it out and building up surface area, but also through stripping down and repurposing the shell and tube condensers to increase their copper surface area. Distillation, like fermentation, is super slow. Despite us operating with direct fire, which you don't tend to see too often at distilleries anymore, a lot of people think that that's going to lead to a really ferocious boil. Actually, it doesn't. It's more like a slow cooker. It's low and slow. And so the net result, once you've been through our 2 1,000-litre wash and spirit stills, and you've made a particularly tight cut of spirit, we don't redistill heads at all. We throw them away. The net result is that we're filling around a barrel a day. So we are quite small in the grand scheme of things, around sort of 50,000 LPA at the end of the day. We fill into a variety of casks, primarily full-size ex-bourbon barrels, but also a selection of different sherries. But we are increasingly, as we go forward, having bottled our first whiskey a year ago and got a few releases under our belts, we're increasingly trying to experiment with different woods and different finishes, mainly to see what is possible. Effectively, and until you've done it, you never know. So we've got some rum, we've got some port, we'll have some imperial stout. And whilst the mainstay of what we're doing will always, I suspect, be in first fill and refill ex-bourbon and similarly in sherry, we are, as a young distillery, trying to see how our spirit adapts to the different wood types that are possible. It's a learning process for us as much as anyone else. So the whiskey that we've picked out for you to enjoy today is this one. This is Bimber Oloroso Cask Small Batch number 2. It's small batch because we just don't produce a lot of whiskey. We really don't. So this is 920 bottles only. We produced batch 1 earlier in the year, and Bimber is pretty popular given how much whiskey we're not making. So we made that for our friends in the European market. And yeah, it was so popular and sold out so quickly that we made another version. This was the UK exclusive. So that's what you're trying, the second batch of this. It was matured in first fill American oak barrels for just over 3 years. It was then re-racked into Oloroso, Spanish oak, for around about 4 months. It is, if you've managed to try somewhere batch 1 to batch 2, it is different. And that is deliberate. Because we are making small batch products and because there is variance, we actually encourage it. We want people to have batch 1, to have batch 2, to notice those differences between those spirits and those bottlings. So whilst the core of the Bimber profile is going to be really sort of high level of fruitiness combined with quite a kick of spice, you're still going to get those inherent differences between the bottles. So this one for me, the sherry integration is really quite light. It's adding sugars and dried fruits, but that core of sort of fruitiness, toffee and spice should run throughout it. I don't tend to give full tasting notes, but that's effectively what I've got from it. We have a number of new whiskies coming out in the near future. Probably the next thing that people will see will be our Bimber Club members bottling. We have a club of members who join each year for a variety of benefits, and each year we'll produce them an exclusive whiskey, doing something a little bit different that we've not done before. So that bottling is quite imminent. And then we'll have the second batch of our ex-bourbon small batch, which was one of our earlier whiskies that released at the beginning of the year. That is currently vatting, and you'll see that in the not too distant future as well.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Matt. A couple of questions came in while you were chatting. One of which was, is there a benefit to the open fire system on the stills versus the traditional or now traditional steam coil? Or what's your thinking on that?
Sure. So it's not just about having a pretty flame. For us, it very much promotes the type of distillation that we want. As I said earlier, it might look ferocious because you can see blue flames licking at the bottom of the pot, but actually it's quite intense on the bottom, but then quite low and slow throughout. So it's simply for us a method for getting that sort of traditional thick fat feel into a young whiskey, particularly at this age, but also to achieve a distillation that is pretty slow. Anyone who's looked online or been to the distillery will see the little drip tray coming out, and it's hardly pouring like a torrent. So the difference actually is strange in that you look at it and you think, wow, that must be really intense, and actually it's the opposite. It's a gentler distillation doing it that way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And what do you feel that brings to the spirit? Just more mellower.
I don't know about mellower. I don't think I'd ever describe Bimber as a mellow whiskey myself. I think what it does is every part of the process leads to a new make spirit that has those key markers that we're looking for. So really bright fruitiness, and then an ability to interact with a barrel at a young age to bring out a whiskey that, in my opinion, tastes nowhere near the sort of 3 years, 5 months of age that it is. And so, yeah, it's about promoting the profile and also the texture, from the congeners that we brought over from fermentation into that end product. So every part of the process leads to that whiskey. And if you change one of them, then you inherently change the end product that you've got.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's great. And like you say, there's nothing kind of subtle about that bottling. I've tried a number of Bimbers, and that's very good indeed. But I find it really interesting. I always get the sense of almost the farmyard, where the barley's actually been grown. It feels very much of the earth. Every release I've tasted of yours.
Yeah, we try to get them to have that distinctive character, and I think that thing that you're describing, Eddie, that sort of the farm or of the barley, comes from two things. One, it comes from how we're processing the barley, so the fact that we're retaining the husks, we're cracking them, not milling them, and two, that really long and wild yeast promoted fermentation. So again, you're going to really start to build all those flavors up before you move it and charge the pots to actually start to make spirit.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, listen, I could spend a lot of time speaking to each and every one of you, but I'm afraid we have to move on. But thank you so much, Matt. That was fascinating.
You're most welcome.
And thank you for the beautiful Oloroso cask. Right, I'm going to pop you in the waiting area, and I'm going to bring in Mike Fisher from the English Whisky Company. Thanks again, Matt. Mike, are you with us? Oh, you're muted.
Sheldon Eddie. Okay.
I'm very well. You look extremely well with all those bottles behind you.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Just all open, just trying to get through them, to be honest with you, and what a hard job it is.
I presume you're in the bathroom, yeah?
Yeah, this is it. Yeah, exactly. Give me the wife's in the bath over here, and yeah, it's all good.
Good stuff. Okay, well, thanks very much for coming on
No
and
problem.
provide this. I'm fascinated to try this whiskey, so I'm gonna let you have a wee chat with the customers that are watching, and
Okay.
then I'll pop back in and we can have a one-on-one in a little while.
No problem. Thank you very much. So, for anybody who's not come across us before, we're the English Whisky Company. We're based over in Norfolk, just outside a place called Thetford. And we've been, well, I think we're really the ones that started the whole English whisky scene off again. So we were the first distillery to be built, first whisky distillery to be built in England for over 100 years. So the last distillery in the Lee Valley closed in about 1905, and then we actually started distilling back in 2006. So we're the granddaddy of English whisky, even though we're only about 14, 15 years old. And it really was born out of a passion, which I think virtually every English whisky that's out there is born out of a passion of one kind or another, or a passion for whisky anyway. And so we were founded by a father and son team, Andrew and James Nelstrop. And it was always James's dream to have his own distillery. They were a farming family that have farmed in the area for generations. And I think it was James's grandfather had made a couple of comments jokingly in the past about it's a shame that we have to, all this barley has to go up to Scotland to be made into something useful. And I think that really, really resonated with James. And it was always wanting to build his own distillery. And then eventually, when he retired, he decided that was it. He was going to have a go at it, and he was going to take all his family's money, and he was going to build this distillery. And I think you've got to really think about where craft spirits and distilleries and things like that were back in 2005, 2006, when he was planning all of this. There wasn't any big gin boom or craft spirits boom or anything like that. So it was quite a left field thing that he was doing, and quite a pioneering thing, I think, that James was doing. And so his main idea was to build like a little craft distillery that would do a few casks a year and basically keep him and his friends and the local area in whiskey. And then he got HMRC involved, and unfortunately at that time, HMRC had a rule that the smallest still that you were allowed was 1,800 litres, which is quite a big still, and bigger than what James was looking to install at the time. And I think instead of him running away from it and thinking, well, that's it, we can't do that, he decided that it would push ahead, and if we're going to do it, we're going to do it properly, and we're going to build a big distillery, which we've got today. And so they set about building this distillery, and they chose a place in Norfolk. Obviously, Norfolk's one of the premium areas for growing barley in the country, and so there's one part of our raw material there. Where we actually built the distillery is right on top of a thing called the Brecklands Aquifer, which is one of the largest underwater deposits of water. And we actually have a borehole that goes down into that, and we draw all our water from that through that borehole from the aquifer. And what that does is that it's really, really hard water that we get out of there. So as that goes through the fermentation process, we end up with a bit sweeter spirit, and it helps to develop those real tropical fruit esters, which you'll get coming all the way through all of our products, really. And so they started distilling in 2006, and what James managed to do was he actually managed to coax Ian Henderson, who was the long-term distiller of Lafroig, out of retirement, to come and help us. And what he did, we actually brought on at the same time a chap called David Fitt, who was a master brewer at Green King Breweries at the time. And he came and joined and worked with Ian for a while and learned his trade, really, in that way. And David's still with us today as our master distiller, and luckily he's earned or been awarded a number of accolades within the industry, including the Distillery Manager of the Year a couple of times, actually, through the Icons of Whisky. And so we now do everything on site apart from the malting of the barley. and that's done by our local maltsters called Crisps, which is literally just up the road from us, a place called Fakenham. And so all our barley comes from the local area, and then a small percentage, probably around about, depends on the yield each year, but anywhere between say 10% and 30% of our barley actually comes from the Nelstrops family farms as well. So we have a real good local sourcing going on there. And so we mill on site and then all the way through to hand bottling on site as well. And I think, like everybody else has said who's been on today, that I think the fermentation process is quite important. I think because David is a brewer by history, then I think he always finds that there's a lot of the flavours that are actually coming out of that. So yeah, we've now been going about 14 years. We have two main core products, which are the original and the smoky, which you'll actually see on the back here with me. So they're unaged stated. One of them is peated, one of them is unpeated. And what we've always tried to do is try to get a real, a nice easy drinking whiskey, something that's quite accessible to everybody, really. But what we've always wanted to do is try and get, doesn't matter whether it's peated or whether it's unpeated, whether it's heavily sherried or anything like that, but we want to try and get that balance between the cask and the distillery character. So we've always got that nice balance, and we've got a little bit of the distillery character running through absolutely everything. So we've now been going about 14 years. We also, on top of our original now smoky, bring out some small batches, which are the ones with the white labels here. And that brings us on to the one that you've got in your box, which is this cheeky little monkey, which is the sherry cask. So it's a gently smoked sherry cask, we actually call it. It's quite a small batch, but one that I really, really like. And I just love the whole ethos behind it and everything, because this is actually the first ever release we've done out of sherry cask that we've actually seasoned on site ourselves, which is something that we try and do quite a bit of, just so we've got that sort of traceability all the way through everything. So some of you may have seen a product that's out there called the Norfolk PX, which is a liqueur that we do. And what we do is we get Pedro Jimenez sherry, and we actually, when we bring it to the distillery, we actually put that into casks, into ex-bourbon casks, and but we add a little bit of whiskey to it, just to fortify it and just to thin it out a little bit, and then hopefully it absorbs into the wood a little bit better. And then eventually, after we've matured that liquid for about 4 or 5 years, then we actually bottle it, and this is the PX in there, which is like Christmas cake in a bottle. But what we do is then take that out, we bottle that as a liqueur, but this one is actually the first whiskey we've released that is actually matured in those casks once that they've actually been seasoned. So it was distilled in May of 2013, and it was bottled in August of this year in 2020. So it's a 7-year-old. And what we've actually done is there's a mixture of peated whiskey gone into those casks, and then around about 50-55 ppm. And also on top of that, we did some unpeated as well. So what I've actually done is 50% of the casks that go into this vatting are peated and 50% are unpeated. So the ppm level comes down to around about 25-26%, somewhere around about there. ppm, sorry. And I absolutely love it, because what it does, it's like dusty books and just a really, really lovely sort of soft, warm leather sort of scent on the nose. And you get some big fat cherries, the big fat black, really dark cherries that come through on it as well. I think it's absolutely glorious whiskey. And I think done at 46%, unless you want to put water with it, and if you want to put lemonade with it, then be my guest. It's your drink at the end of the day, and you drink it however you want. But I just think it's a really, really rich, lovely, sweet whiskey that's really just ace for all time, to be honest.
Very nice, Mike.
No problem.
Thank you. Is it?
You know what? The sun has just come out. I'm just going to close my blind here. Dear me. I can't see him. There we go.
Oh, there you go.
So I'm actually up in York, because of COVID, so I'm not down at the distillery. And as you well know, the sun always shines round York, doesn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, it was shining here, but it looks a bit ominous at the moment.
Never mind.
Thanks for that, Mike.
That's right.
Just trying to see if there's any questions from the viewers, but not at the moment. It's interesting, isn't it, that you referred to yourself as the granddaddies of the English whiskey scene. It seems unbelievable, really, because it doesn't.
And still only a toddler, really. In
doesn't seem like 5 minutes since you guys started. I mean, I remember welcoming Andrew to festivals in the early days, and with all the chapter series, and it was very interesting.
Yeah, and a lot has happened. We must be doing something right, because obviously there's a lot of us now, which is great. And it's, for a lot of years we were banging a very lone drum, which is hard work, and now there's more and more of us, which is I think a good thing. And hopefully we'll all rise at that and eventually end up with this English whiskey sector. Yeah,
well, the signs are good, as you say. Anyway, listen, Mike, thank you so much for that and for the delicious gently smoked sherry.
No problem.
I'm going to bring Dan in now, and we'll get you back in a little while, okay, Mike?
All right, no worries. Thank you.
Cheers.
Hey, Eddie. How are you?
I'm very well. How's it going with you?
Really well, thanks. Really well. I'm sat virtually here in the distillery. I'm actually in my guest room, but it's only 3 miles from the distillery. But you can see our whiskey pots, Mary and Janice, behind us, and our new sherry cask next to me.
Absolutely. You very rarely would get bored of that view. Anyway, Dan, I'm in common with everyone else. I'm going to let you tell your story, and then I'll pop in when there's an opportune moment. Okay?
Sure. Thank you very much. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in, and it's a pleasure to be here with Eddie. And thanks for putting this on. And great just to see so many of my colleagues again this weekend, because as I was saying on Facebook just now, 2 English whiskey sessions in the same weekend tells you something about this category, which is really exciting, and not something I would have ever expected when I set up the distillery in 2014, when there was obviously our friends in Norfolk. There was 1 or 2 whiskeys that had come out prior to us, but really we were the second, I suppose, to get going in a sort of a meaningful way. And as you can tell from the accent, it's not a Cotswolds accent. I grew up in New York City. And I spent about 20 years living in Europe, and a long time in France, and that's where I kind of got bitten by the whiskey bug. And I went up to Scotland quite often, just touring distilleries in my spare time. And that's where I really got this sense of what whiskey could be at its best, and particularly as one distillery I came into close contact with, because I bought a cask, and that was Bruichladdich, and they were very big on the whole concept of terroir. And cut to 2012, I'd moved from France to the UK. I was living in London, and my wife and I have a little farmhouse in the middle of nowhere in the North Cotswolds, a couple of miles from where the distillery now is. I was looking out on a field of spring barley, and a thought occurred to me that with all the barley that grows up and down the Cotswolds, why not? Why hasn't anyone ever made any whiskey? So I traded in sort of 30 years in the city for making whiskey, which I knew nothing about. But thankfully, we had some amazing sort of mentors that helped us. Harry Coburn, who used to run the Bimber Distillery, and then, of course, the late, great Dr. Jim Swan. So we went into production in September of 2014. So we're now in our 7th year. The whiskey's been out for 3 years. And whiskey has very much been the focus, although we now do a range of other spirits as well. We have a couple of gins and some interesting liqueurs. We've done apple cider brandy. We've had fun with it, basically. And what the common thread that runs through everything we do, whether it's whiskey, gin, liqueurs, etc., is flavor. It's, for us, it's really all about flavor. The alcohol is almost incidental. In fact, my hero is a guy who makes Calvados in Normandy and likes to cut big squares out of the tops of all his casks so he can just evaporate off and flash off the most alcohol possible to concentrate the flavor, and I think that's great. But our first whiskey that we came out with was our Cotswolds single malt, our flagship. It's made using local barley, grows about 15 minutes away from us in the town of Coombe, which is right near Woodstock, the Blenheim estate, actually, if you're familiar with Blenheim Palace. And it gets taken down to Warminster malting. So a couple of us are using Warminster. They are great folks. It's the oldest working maltings in the UK. And so we're very proud of the fact that 100% of our malt is floor malted. And then we very much follow a method that we worked on with Jim Swan. I think very similar to what a lot of folks are trying to do on the English whiskey scene, trying to basically get the fruitiest spirit possible and the cleanest spirit so that as a young spirit, it tastes and works very well. So we do everything at the distillery once the malt arrives. So we mill, we mash, we ferment, we distill. We mash a very clear wort. Tends to lend itself to a fruitier spirit. Long fermentation, 4 days, 2 types of yeast, Anchor distiller's yeast and Fermentus French yeast, which promotes ester formation. We have a very short heads cut, and a very high cut over to tails, which gives us a very pure heart, and which, you know, even in a few months, really, some of the impurities in that new make have flashed off. In fact, we love our new make so much, we sell it. It's called White Pheasant. You can find it on our website. Our flagship single malt is a blend of probably the 2 casks we use the most, one of which is First Fill Bourbon, which we get direct from Kentucky. We're using premium bourbon casks, Basil Hayden's, Booker's. These are casks that haven't been wrung out, so to speak, with steam for their last little drop of bourbon. So when they come to us, they are just full of flavor. And then the STR casks that Max was describing, the shaved, toasted, and recharred American oak ex-red wine casks that Jim sort of invented while working with another great distillery in Taiwan, Kavalan. Just puts a tremendous amount of really nice cask character into the whiskey very quickly. So, in fact, really after 6 to 12 months, we already had a great deal of character, and it was released at 3 years. Now, since our whiskey came out, our flagship came out in 2017. We've come out with a number of other additions. We have our Founder's Choice, which is 100% STR wine cask. We have our peated cask, which is a quarter cask, ex-Isla quarter cask. We've just come up with a very nice French oak Sauterne cask on a limited edition. And I'm proud to say it's really this weekend that we're launching our sherry cask. And this is the first edition we've ever come up with, which is using these sherry casks. With about 15-20% of our wood program is sherry. They're all from an amazing guy down in Spain, Miguel Martin. I think a few people, certainly a lot of people in Scotland, get their sherry wood from Miguel. He's a great guy, and he does everything from make the wood. He owns 2 sawmills, one in the States, one in Spain. He has his own cooperage, his own winemaking plant, his own maturing seasoning warehouses, and then even a sherry vinegar factory. So it's completely vertically integrated. We have been getting a variety of sherry casks from Miguel because we really didn't know which ones we wanted most. So we just got a little bit of everything. So what we've done with this is a blend of 6 different types of cask. And we have tried to focus on blending wines, blending woods, and blending sizes. So basically what you've got is 2 types of wood, most importantly. So you got American oak and Spanish oak. You've got 2 wines, Oloroso seasoning and Pedro Jimenez seasoning, and you've got 2 sizes, hogsheads, 250 liters, and butts, 500 liters. The butts are actually older butts, bodega casks as they're known, that have been previously used in the sherry trade, whereas the hogsheads were new, made by Miguel, and just provide a lot of flavor. This is it's a limited edition. There's about 10,000 bottles that has to last us pretty much a whole year, because in a year's time we'll do another blend. It'll be different. It'll be a different blend of sherry cask, but it'll still be 100% sherry cask. For the next couple of months, it's only available in our shops in the Cotswolds and online on our website, but then it will be slowly coming out into trade from the beginning of next year. We did try a couple of different strengths to see sort of where we felt the sweet spot was. We tried sort of in the 60s and 55 and 50. We went with about 57. It just seemed right to us. Although I will say that I do find a little bit of water really kind of opens it up. So I put a couple of drops in there. What I really love about this is that it's the first one that we've ever done that has Spanish oak in it. So, the big difference between European oak and American oak in terms of the amount of tannin that goes in. And I think you have to be sort of judicious with the Spanish oak because there can be a little bit of a bitterness to it. But this is probably about 25% Spanish oak. And I love what it does to the mix. And I obviously love what the sherries do. What I get from this absolutely most of all is Christmas pudding, and more specifically, whiskey soaked raisins cooked in salty butter, which I've not yet done, but I may do that if my wife kind of lets me. But I have actually thrown down the challenge to take on a Christmas pudding this year. I think I'll probably have the time, and make it from scratch. There'll probably be a lot of this being used, and I'll keep you informed on how a New Yorker does with a Christmas pudding.
It's definitely a mouthful, a big mouthful. Dan,
and the whiskey's pretty good too.
It's quite, yeah. It's a bit of a departure, isn't it? I mean, obviously, sherry casks are quite different in the effect they have on whiskey, and this is a very clear example of that. But obviously, you undoubtedly you want to stick to your kind of house style, and this is very much a kind of limited batch, I'm guessing.
Well, yeah, one of the things that was said to us by a pretty well-known whiskey reviewer that he liked most about our 4 or 5 whiskeys that he tried was that the distillery character comes through in all of them. And for me, that's really important. I don't really ever have a great desire to make a whiskey that'll be overwhelmed by wood. And the one where there's the biggest risk of that probably is the STR, because the STR does pack such a punch. And again, the nicest thing said to us is that even with that big STR character, which by the way only works once in STR, you will not get that character the second time you use it. It drops by like 80-90%. But even with the STR, the distillery character still comes through. And that's my goal, is to always make whiskey where you can taste the whiskey and not just the cask.
Yeah, well, I think you've succeeded there. Just a question that's come in, simply, maybe I didn't hear it or they didn't hear it, but when can they buy this and where?
Right, well, you can buy it today on cotswoldsdistillery.com, and it's delivered sort of. I got mine. Actually, I bought one for home. It came in 18 hours, which I was pretty impressed with our partners on that one. So our flagship is already now in sort of Sainsbury's and Waitrose and Ocado, Amazon, all that kind of stuff. But what we try and do with a new release is keep it sort of in house for the first 3 months. So through the holidays, this will be just on our website or in our 3 stores, all of which are open. So if you're coming up to the Cotswolds for a weekend, highly recommend it. Come see us at the distillery. The cafe is open. We've got 2 other stores, Broadway and Bourton on the Water as well. And that's in all the stores.
Sounds good to me. Well, I was due to come and see you I think a couple of months ago now, but unfortunately, as you know, that trip got cancelled. So hopefully we can organise something again when conditions allow.
We're waiting for you. I'd love to have you.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, Dan. Okay, Dan, thank you so much, and thanks for the sherry cask whiskey there. I'm going to pop you back in the waiting area and bring in Chris, if you don't mind. And I'll see you back in a little while. Okay, thanks. Okay, let's see if we can find Chris. Chris, how are you doing?
How's it going?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Yes, very good. Last but not least, hopefully.
Yes, well, thanks for waiting patiently. I know it's been about an hour or so since we started, but thanks for hanging on.
I've enjoyed the drams while I've waited. So.
Okay, well, listen, I'll be any longer. I'll let you take the floor, as it were, and then I'll pop back in at an opportune moment. So thanks again, Chris, for coming on, and here you go.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, guys, so obviously for those who aren't familiar with us, we're the Lakes Distillery. We were founded back in 2011. So the idea really was thought up by a chap called Paul Curry. So Paul Curry actually started a distillery with his father, Harold Curry, back in 1995, which then went on to be quite a successful distillery. So obviously, probably a lot of you are aware of their whiskies on the Isle of Arran. Paul basically fell out of love with the distillery when unfortunately Harold passed away. So he left there, I think it was around 2003, 2004. And then basically decided that he obviously wanted to build a distillery in, here in England. So obviously kind of building on what everybody's been talking about today, about bringing in sort of English heritage of making whiskey. So where better than to do in the beautiful Lake District, obviously kind of very much feels very reminiscent of Scotland. So kind of first on Paul's list in terms of finding a location for the distillery was finding a building with heritage and of course a really good water source. So thankfully, after a long search, we've discovered an old farm between Keswick and Cockermouth, for those who know the Lake District, in a little village called Set Murphy. It was an old farm that was very much unloved. No one had lived there or worked there for 20 or 30 years. So it was in a right state, as you can imagine. We basically had to strip out the whole building, take away part of the bricks, literally one at a time, and then put it back together, one brick at a time as well, exactly the way we found it. So as you can imagine, it was a laborious process, but in just over a year, unbelievably, we managed to go from farm status to pretty much ready to go. But the distillery was always very much built in with having visitors at mind, which obviously a lot of distilleries aren't built in that way. And I think that's one advantage of English whiskies is of course that we obviously have new distilleries that we're able to invite people to, unlike our brothers up in Scotland. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to build a distillery which very much built on the idea of Scotch, but of course we wanted to bring an English twist, I suppose. So so in 2014 we finished building the distillery and we were ready to go. So the first distillation occurred, I think it was the 20th of December 2014, and yeah, we basically set to go in 2014, and in 2015, of course, while we were waiting for our whiskey to be produced, we started producing gin and vodka, and of course we released a blended whiskey as well to sort of get people bought into what we were trying to achieve. And then in 2017 we released our first, 2018, we released our first single malt, which was a one-off 100 bottles, buy it while you can, at auction, and unbelievably one of the bottles went for £7,000. So obviously we were pretty pleased with that. Obviously we got a record at the time, but really when I talk about a single malt, I don't really talk about our first single malt coming out until last September. So last September we launched our Whiskey Makers Reserve range, which is very much just underpinned by our principles of sherry maturation. But to go back a step, our distillery was very much built in mind is kind of controlling the beginning of the process. So in other words, the distillation process isn't really where we see most of the flavor coming. Of course, we want to make sure we control it and get as much character coming through as possible, but it's very much a vehicle for the maturation process. So for us, it's controlling each aspect of it. So a holistic approach to whiskey making. So Davil joined us in 2016. So when Davil joined us, Davil Gandhi joined us from Macallan. So of course Macallan, being a brand I'm sure all of you are aware of, very much all about luxury and of course sherry maturation. So Davil brought not just his knowledge of distillation, obviously blending, and of course that sherry maturation. So he also knew of course the Martin family over in Jerez and used that relationship to build where we are today. So really when we launched that first single malt in September 2019 was kind of the first statement of where we're trying to go, the direction we're trying to go in. So yeah, so really for us, it's controlling the beginning of the process. So in other words, we've got a 9,000 and 12,000 litre still, for the first distillation and second distillation. We're very much controlling what comes off the other end, and then we've of course got our own mash tuns to build into that. But really, we believe the magic, the artistry really comes in during the maturation process. So our cask selection program is extensive. So Davil will use, I think it's at last count, something like 60 different combinations of casks. So anything from European oak to so anything from Spanish to French to American oak. But it's not necessarily casks that have been used to make sherry before. I think a bit like Dan said earlier from Cotswolds, that we are obviously, of course, making casks to our specifications. So it's really the costs of the casks are quite eye-watering at times, but of course, we believe that the best casks produce the best whiskies. So 80% or even up to 90% of the flavour of a whiskey in our eyes comes from that. So we think that the most time, energy, and of course cost should go into that aspect of the process. So the cask selection process is really, really important. Second of all, for us, it's about nurturing those casks. So Davil is constantly tasting, constantly evaluating, constantly inspecting, I suppose you could say, his casks in the warehouses. So he'll, that's not just from, gets to 3 years and then we'll start kind of seeing what the progression is. It's literally almost from day one. As often as 4 weeks or 6 weeks apart, he will be tasting samples of casks from, that are 6 months old or 12 months old or whatever it might be, and basically evaluating those whiskies. They're maturing at a faster rate. Has he perhaps found a certain flavour in a different whiskey that he wants to then add to a different one? And he's very much building almost like a picture, like a canvas. So he wants to create like layers of flavour. So he'll use different things together. So I think a lot of people, when they think about blending, of course, they think about the blend at the end of the process. We're blending all the way through. So it's actually built on an idea from the French called élevage. So that's what they do in cognac production, which is very much this idea of building layers of flavour and changing different dynamics by doing so. So that's kind of the kind of other biggest kind of thing that we do a little bit different, is that nurturing process. So let's talk a little bit about the whiskey. Of course, I'll answer any questions you may have. Obviously, it's quite hard to capture everything in this very short period, but very much our focus is on the cask process. So Whiskey Maker's Reserve. So Davil being our whiskey maker, this is really very much just his masterpiece, I suppose. But it's still very much a journey. So this isn't a definitive, this is where we want to be. But this is really kind of taking our journey of sherry maturation. So Whiskey Maker's Reserve number 1 came out in September, as you can imagine, sold very, very quickly. Whiskey Maker's Reserve number 2 came out in October, November, so really quickly after, shortly afterwards, and knowing that, that the first release has got, sell out very quickly, but also because, really we make our whiskey on when it's ready, we bottle it. And then Whiskey Maker's Reserve number 3 came out this summer, unfortunately slightly delayed due to COVID, of course. But it's gone on to be just as popular as the others. Whiskey Maker's Reserve number 1 was bottled up above 60%, and same with number 2. Whiskey Maker's Reserve number 3, we wanted to just be a little bit slightly more delicate. Of course, this is heavily sherry matured. Whiskey's a sherry bomb, for want of a better phrase. But at 54%, it's just a little bit more palatable, a little bit more delicate. So this is really just about being elegant and creamy, and it's all about texture as well. So for those who enjoy a sherry-led whiskey, this really is the one. Interesting enough, I just saw someone's note there about how chocolatey this is. Absolutely, this is rich and thick and really got a huge kind of mouthfeel. The finish is incredibly long. It's one that you'd probably want to sit with, ideally a slightly larger measure, and perhaps sit with for half an hour to an hour, and really just enjoying that dram as it evolves and changes with the temperature.
Yeah, it's a very nice way to finish off the tasting, Chris. I hope everyone would agree that each and every one of those whiskies has a lot to say. But just fascinated to know, because obviously before last September, October, as you said, nobody really tasted any single malt from the lakes. You'd kept it a very well-kept secret. So you've kind of unleashed it and created quite a following already, like Bimber and the other guys as well. But I'm just fascinated to know, because obviously you're kind of 3 additions into the Whiskey Makers Reserve. Is the house style, if you like, of the lakes? Do you believe that in years to come it will be a similar kind of very sherry-driven style, which is quite different to anybody else?
Yeah, really, that is going to be our kind of standout point. So Whiskey Makers Reserve, the end game really is that there will be no number on the front. So, that could be 3 years, 4 years, 5 years or more, but Whiskey Makers Reserve with a number on the front as an addition, it won't be the case forever, but very much this is a journey to find that perfect balanced sherry bomb, I suppose.
Yeah. Thanks. And in the time scale, do you know roughly which edition we'll be seeing the juice, the new make that will have been made under Davil's kind of directorship?
So in Whiskey Makers Reserve number 1, 2, and 3 there'll have been some juice that came from Davil's stewardship from 2016 in terms of his distillation. So yeah, we're very much blending all the time. So that, as I said earlier, that élevage process is literally, drams that are, whiskies that are put in cask, which, from 2016, 17 will have very much gone into our release, the Whiskey Makers Reserve number 3. But then there'll be some that are slightly older. So, it's our 6th birthday in December. So, we've actually got whiskies that are a little bit older. We're still, still quite youthful, but yeah, there is Davil's juices in these.
Maybe I should have used a different term, because that sounds.
Yeah, it's quite the term.
There's a few people bickering about which one of the series they like, which is a good problem to have, because I've tasted all 3 and none of them disappoint, and I think everyone just looks forward to the next.
Yeah, I think it really depends on kind of what your preference is. I think kind of number 1 is probably the feistiest of the 3. Number 2 probably being the most sherried, or that it feels the most sherried to me. And number 3 is just a little bit more subtle, a bit more stripped back. At 54%, it just feels a little less feisty. But it was very much bottled at 54 because that was where we felt the balance was. We could have done it at 58 or all the way up at cask strength, which would have been just under 60. Or we could have done a bit lower, but we just felt at 54 it was just right.
And I won't ask you to tell me when batch 4 is released and what you think of it.
I'm yet to have tasted the final products, of course. I've tried some kind of elevations of what we're going to be doing, but it'll be springtime Whiskey Makers 4.
Okay, cool. All right, well, Chris, thanks very much. Really useful explanation of what's happening up at the lakes, and continue on with the good work. And now I'm going to bring everyone else back in,
Great.
so we can have a little tete-a-tete together. I think that's all of us, and obviously Joe to be here. Gentlemen, thank you so much for giving us those very useful nuggets of information about your distilleries and whiskies. I'm going to ask each of you a question, just so to close things out, which I've been asking all weekend, but maybe adjust it slightly to it being more focused on English whiskey. But what I've been asking is, what trends or innovations or things that your future developments excite you in the whiskey industry, whether it be technical, whether it be marketing, whatever it might be? Is there anything coming down the track? And you can apply this specifically to English whiskey if you like, or whiskey in general. And I'll ask Chris first, because you're the first on my screen. So Chris, what do you think?
Put me on the spot a little bit, but I think the key thing, certainly from our point of view, is going to be the use of casks. I think the beauty of the English whiskey category, I suppose, now we are creating a category, is that we do have the ability to use any number of casks. I mean, we try and follow SWA rules to an extent, but at the same time, we don't have to do that. I think what we have is that we have that ability to be more flexible. So, creating something, in a relatively short space of time, but also in relatively small numbers, just gives us that advantage, I suppose, and within our category.
Mm-hmm. Great stuff. How about you, Mike? Oh, I think you're on mute. Hold on. Can you unmute yourself? Let me unmute you. No, you need to unmute yourself, Mike.
There we go. I'm on. Excellent. I think a number of things really. I think, like Chris said, I think casks are one thing that is going to, especially in English whiskey, is something that I think a lot of innovation will come from. Also, I think different mash bills. I think there's a lot of us within English whiskey that are doing some really experimental mash bills. I know we've done a few with our Norfolk grain whiskies and things like that, and playing around with that. And so I think them two really. But I also think one thing that's come out over this whole COVID is things like this online, and how it's moved things online, and how I think that encompasses an awful lot more people. And if we were doing this tasting today in a physical place, saying wherever it might be, half of the people who are on here and watching probably wouldn't have been able to join us.
That's absolutely true, Mike. The potential there is great. Thanks for that. Max, you're the next on my screen. How about yourself?
Max to the next.
Yes, sorry, Max. Yes.
Yeah. Eddie, I think, these are kind of elements common to, all the discussions we've had with everyone here today, is that, at the end of the day, the English category, in particular, and the English distilleries are, they're small by kind of the standards of our, forebears north of the border. And I think, for me, that just lends itself to innovation and the pursuit of flavor, as we're all doing, quality. And I think that's kind of what excites me, that there's no sense in my mind in which any of us are on the kind of trail of producing millions of liters of something that has to be the same in 10 years' time as it is today. So I think the innovative side of the English whiskey sector is what excites me, and that might be things like mash bills we've heard of, and we've just been playing with that in the last week. But also, I think one of the things that will be really interesting for me, I think, is to see a little bit more collaboration in the English whiskey scene, and that's not in any kind of critical sense, because I think we all are collaborative in our perspectives and trying to promote the sector. But when you look at something like craft beer, you tend to see, let's just say, more, very distinct kind of collaborations. And I think that's just an interesting space that, maybe hasn't been investigated yet. So who knows?
Yeah, well, there's still a lot of time, isn't there? Let's hope. So,
yes. Yeah, absolutely.
With it being such a young or relatively young industry, I think there's definitely time to get that sorted out. But I think you're absolutely right. Thank you for that, Max. Dan, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think for me, the things that I find most exciting, and I won't talk about what we're doing, but in whiskey in general, things that are most exciting are where sort of world whiskey is going and where English whiskey is going. World whiskey, not defined by a certain geography, but I think probably defined by size, by people who are thinking flavor more than volume, non-PLC whiskey, maybe you could call it, or whatever. But just the profusion, and that includes Scotland. There's a lot of new distilleries, really exciting. We saw Knockneen just open. A lot of interesting stuff going on in Scotland too. So this idea of bringing back whiskey to its slightly more, human scale roots, artisanally, flavor forward, that's really exciting. And of course, a subset of that is English whiskey. And to be really honest, when I started this up, I never thought that I would be sitting here in a million years with all these other guys on the stream talking to you and really, and this being the second one of the weekend, talking about English whiskey. So that's wonderful to be part of. And I found out about stuff this weekend I'd never even tried. I mean, there's corn liquor, there's strange smoked water whiskey being made in nice rye in Suffolk. I mean, really cool stuff. And one of the things that we've been trying to do, without going into too much detail, is I think Max was kind of alluding to, is getting the guys together in England. And we've now been speaking together amongst ourselves a few times. And there's just this great vibe and this kind of excitement. It's almost palpable when we all get together and talk. You know, we don't compete against each other in so much as we all as a group are trying to get our 0.5% of market share or whatever. And I think that's just taking it in a really wonderful place. I couldn't have asked for more when I started this up.
Yeah. Well, that's a very positive thing to think about at the end there. Thank you for that, Dan. Matt, what about yourself?
I think my esteemed colleagues have said it all already. I think one of the most exciting things is literally this. The fact that we're all here, despite it being a necessity earlier in the year because of the global pandemic, that actually having a panel online allows English whiskey to have so much more reach. And the fact that we're all here, as Dan's just said, in a short space of years, I find that amazing and very exciting. But to top it all off, the fact that we've got so many people online, they're engaged and knowledgeable, and that they are, as passionate about whiskey and English whiskey as I am. I'm just really excited for the future of whiskey and English whiskey generally. It's a great space to be in right now with so much passion and love and so much interest from people joining events like this.
Here. From my own perspective, yeah, absolutely. Joe, you're here saying things.
Yeah, sure. I'm not really sure how much more I can add on the English whiskey front. There's, these guys we're all banging the same drum, aren't we? Everyone's really on the same page. It is hugely exciting. There is absolutely enormous potential. I think if I was gonna strip it back to a couple of things, the mash bill thing, really brilliant. Spirit running off English whiskey stills, which isn't perhaps malt barley focused. That's a really interesting area. There's definitely some amazing potential in that direction. We may have some plans coming in that line pretty soon. So yeah, there's that side of it. But I mean, Dan said it, where he didn't think 4 years ago he would be on a panel in this sense, talking about whiskey shoulder to shoulder with other producers in this way, and that is amazing. But I love the idea of where these whiskies will be in 10 years time, in 15 years time. The quality level of everything that we've just tasted now is absolutely top notch. Everybody is making really, really beautiful, really amazing whiskey, and to have the footing that we've got, the quality across all the producers at the minute, and where that is going to go next is really exciting.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, agreed. Well, I would certainly say that the future is bright and rosy. I feel for English whiskey, and whiskey, in the broader sense of the word too. But anyway, guys, listen, I just thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate you giving up your part of your Sunday afternoon. We have another broadcast to do in about 25 minutes, so I'm not going to keep you any longer. Also, thank you for everyone who has tuned in, supported the event by buying tasting packs, however else, and for getting involved in this tremendous English whiskey tasting as part of the Whiskey Festival in a Box. So, guys, thank you so much for coming on. Slam Javar, everybody.
Thank you.
I've run out of whiskey, but never mind.
Cheers, guys.
All tremendous whiskies, and we look forward to tasting more in years to come. So thanks
so much, Eddie.
Thanks, Eddie.
Cheers,
Thanks
guys.
a lot.
Good afternoon,
Thanks,
everyone.
Guys.